UNCTAD Secretary General, Rebeca Grynspan, you're most welcome. Mr. Paul Akiwumi, Director of UNCTAD Division on Africa, List Developed Countries and Special Programs, you are most welcome. Members of the Fourth Estate, friends from the university, and other distinguished members in the room, you are most welcome to be part of this launch this morning. We are here for the launch of the Economic Development in Africa report for 2023. And the theme is the potential of Africa to capture technology-intensive global supply chains. The theme is the potential of Africa to capture technology-intensive global supply chains. Before I proceed any further, let me just give some basic housekeeping. Kindly let's all have our phones on silent mode so we don't disrupt the program as it continues. And in case you want to visit the rooms of convenience, please exit by this door, walk straight on, turn to your right, and you'll be able to get assisted. So once again, welcome to the launch of UNCTAD's Economic Development in Africa report for 2023. This event is being live streamed and attended by journalists in Geneva and all over the world. Journalists following online can ask the questions through the Zoom chat. Let me reiterate, if you're plugging in virtually, you can ask your questions through the Zoom chat. You get access to be able to voice your question right from the stage here. Tech team, just check my mic ahead, please. We remind all journalists that the report is under embargo until today at noon, Nairobi time. Very important, under embargo until noon today. And after that, all material can be found on the UNCTAD website. Secretary General will give introductory remarks followed by technical insights from the Director of the Africa Division, and then we shall open the floor to questions, both in the room and online. So as you listen through, just be getting questions together, we shall get into a Q&A session where I shall be coordinating how that takes place. Without any further ado, Secretary General, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, and habariza asubuhi. Is that okay? You understand what I said? Thank you, all of you, for being here. It's an honor to present UNCTAD's Economic Development in Africa Report 2023, our flagship report for the continent here in Nairobi, and thank you all for accompanying us. And hello also to all the journalists and friends that are following us from Geneva. So this launch holds special significance as it is my first official visit to Kenya as UNCTAD Secretary General. And really Kenya is an example of a vibrant economy emphasizing Africa's potential in global trade and world economic future. That is exactly the point that we want to make in this report. So that's why we say not only that it was important to come here to Africa to launch the report, not to do it in our headquarters, but to do the global launch here in Kenya is out. Nairobi is Africa's business hub, home to a robust stock exchange, symbolizes economic dynamism. Kenya's resilience during COVID-19 was impressive. The GDP growth in 2021 and also the GDP growth in 2022 were important signals of resilience and progress. Let me say this without, obviously forgetting how hard all the developing countries have been hit by what we call the cascade crisis, yes? COVID-19, climate change here, the drought, obviously that has hit the country very severely as it has the whole Horn of Africa, and the war in Ukraine with the food prices going up and inflation coming in the developing world because of that, and the strength of the dollar obviously has hit very severely the most vulnerable. But this report tries to understand also the incredible potential of this continent. So we will center our attention on that part and on the main message of the report. but obviously we can talk about all the other issues if that is needed. So as I said, our report underlines how Africa can become a major actor in the global supply chains by harnessing the vast resources of materials needed by high technology sectors and their own growing consumer market. Trade isn't just goods, as we know. Yes, it's ideas and capacities that reflect the adaptability of countries to the global economy. So diversification today is key for all the continent's economies reliant on a better future. So if we will be dependent only on one or few commodities, we know that that is risky. And so we have to get away from that path. Diversifying trade builds resilience and enhances innovation because a wide-based economy is key for private sector development and employment opportunities to really thrive. And that is what the demographic bonus of Africa really requires. Our framework highlights 3 export tiers that we all know about. We have the raw commodity tier, the intermediate products, and the complex finished goods. So, as nations export higher tier goods, productivity and wages rise, reshaping economies. Integration into complex global supply chains is the path that we are advocating. 3 reasons that we consider that drive what we call this huge opportunity for the continent. 1, geopolitics and trade dynamics, including the African continental free trade area, renewables, and demographics. So let me go through the 3. Geopolitics and trade dynamics, renewables, and demographics. Geopolitically, countries and businesses are seeking the diversification of suppliers. And this is because the reliance on one supplier is as risky as commodity dependence on one raw material. Yes? So diversification and diversification of risk is something that is happening in the trade dynamics at global level right now. Renewables, and that's a great opportunity for Africa. And this together with the African continental free trade area has incredible synergies for really participating in higher and more complex supply chains at global level. The second reason is renewables. And we all know that this is a mineral-rich continent, basic to the supply chain in renewables, being batteries or energy renewables. We know that Africa is centerpiece for raw materials. So the question here is how we can go up in the value addition ladder with this great possibility. And the third reason is demographics, and it's Africa's youthful population and growing consumer markets that propel tech innovation. So Africa's tech ecosystem growth is impressive. Hubs in artificial intelligence, 3D printing, and blockchain are fostering innovation and redefining supply chains. Fintech and e-commerce are thriving, and Kenya is a very good example, showcasing Africa's entrepreneurship. This transformation is important for African economies, but more importantly, for African population, for its men and women. The report highlights that creating an environment conducive to technology-intensive industries would help raise wages and confidence. Currently, the minimum wages in Africa are around, in average, $220 per month. In the Americas, not only the US, but the continent, is around $670 per month. So there is an important path to follow. Our report is positive on the potential of the continent. It analyzes in depth the untapped potential in automobiles in several sectors, and we choose automobiles, solar energy, and pharmaceuticals. And Paul Akiwumi, that is the director of the African and LDC's division in UNCTAD, will get into much more detail on those areas and elaborate further the report. So, African priorities must guide this journey towards high-tech potential. However, we know that investment is needed. Financial investment as much as human capital investment. And we know that this is a bottleneck. So according to the report, the value of the African supply chain finance market rose by 40% between 2021 and 2022, reaching $41 billion. But we know that this is not enough. Micro and small medium enterprises are still battling, and having important obstacles for the financing to be part of these supply chains, and the continent can mobilize more funds by removing barriers to supply chain finance, including regulatory challenges, high-risk perception, and insufficient credit information. However, from UNCTAD, we also underline the current global context that is extremely challenging, and we advocate for debt relief to offer African countries fiscal space to invest in strengthening their supply chains. And we know that fiscal space is needed, and here we join the voice of the President of Kenya that has advocated for the international community to really respond to the developing countries and the African countries in terms of their need to have more fiscal space and be able to have a better path of financing liquidity, investment, and obviously the issue of debt. On average, and this is something that we highlight in a report that we launched with the Secretary General of the UN on the challenge of debt worldwide. We call the report A World of Debt, global debt. This is an important number that we should remember, that African countries pay 4 times more for borrowing than the US, and 8 times more than the European countries. So for the same risk profile, African countries pay much more for their loans and for their debt than the rest of the developed world. And this must change if Africa is really to achieve its full economic potential and be a major actor in global supply chains. The UN stands committed to supporting Africa in this path, and I hope that this report and the work that UNCTAD has done in more detail in sectors and in the enablers for Africa to be able to take on this opportunity that is in front of us will help support countries in this battle. So now I leave you with Paul Akiwumi, And I thank you again for being here with us, and we will be happy to take any questions that you have. So,
thank you so much, Secretary General UNCTAD, for your remarks, capturing issues around geopolitics, renewables, trade dynamics, and also touching this whole environment in which the continent finds itself, especially with regards to public debt. I'd like to request that we have slides in the back so we have proceedings here without interruption. And now let me hand over the stage to Paul for the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, and good morning to all of you. Thank you very much, Secretary General. Perhaps let me start off with what the Secretary General mentioned. It's a little bit about the global crisis, the disruption in the global supply chains that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. Also, the need for multinational firms to diversify their supply chains, which leads to the resilience building, also avoiding disruption increases demand, and a much further potential. So what was the potential? What was the motivation for this report? And quite frankly, the motivation of the report was to clearly look at the potential for Africa to integrate into these high technology intensive supply chains. Not just any supply chain, but the high technology intensive supply chains. We looked, as the Secretary General mentioned, at the automotive industry, electronics, renewable energy, and pharmaceutical and medical devices sector. And this is extremely timely in the global context because it outlines viable solutions to these problems, not only to the problems of multinational firms, but also to the problems associated with the problems of Africa's need for decent jobs and to add value to products on the continent. So the report, we then decided that we would look at and assess 3 main things. One is, the first thing was the new technologies and the manufacturing trends going around that Africa would need to embrace to allow it to be viable, to actually adopt and to be attractive to demonstration and part of the global supply. The second thing was we looked at very specifically, as the Secretary mentioned, also the issue about financing, was also the emerging financing and technology solutions. Technology solutions that can help to address the liquidity constraints while improving operational efficiency as well. And then the third thing we focused on was the recommendations of strategic policies, not only for governments, but also for the private sector, and also for regional institutions and regional bodies, so that they can integrate into the global supply chain. So essentially, when we talk about the global supply chain, when we talk about supply chains, we're looking at 3 main areas. First, we're talking about procurement. Second, we talk about production. And third, we talk about distribution. Now, what are the potentials for Africa within those 3 sectors? First of all, procurement. Secretary General also mentioned it. The sources of raw materials. The abundance of raw materials on the continent. Secondly, when we talk about production, we talk about the demographic dividends. The youth, but not just the youth, but the high technology savvy youth that is emerging in the African continent. And today, you may note that there are over 670 or 700 incubators or innovation labs within the African continent, and within Kenya itself, there are 12 already. So there is a massive workforce that is available on the continent, and this is very critical. And also, what is important in the production cycle is the energy. Now, we are talking about renewable energy, And if you have a look at one of these atlases of renewable energy potential for the globe, you'll see Africa is one of the leaders in solar, in hydro, in wind, and in geothermal. But this is not just renewable energy. What this means is that the production can be done with energy that is clean energy. The processing of raw materials can be done with clean energy, rather than exporting the raw materials to a country which is using fossil fuels and polluting. So there is a public good that Africa can also provide to the global community. And the third thing, of course, is the distribution. And distribution essentially is infrastructure, it's air travel, sea, land, rail. And we know that Africa has a long way to go, but Africa over the last 15 years has made tremendous strides. It's still below the global average, but it has also shown innovation as well. We've seen during the COVID pandemic that there were no passenger flights flying anywhere else. But there's only one airline, Ethiopian Airlines, which converted all its passenger planes into cargo planes. So it was able to feed the supply chain in various with medicines and PPPs and all the rest of it, not just to Africa, but to the globe. So the innovation in that sector. Now, this is very crucial when we are talking about exporting and also talking about adding value and exporting to other parts of the continent, other parts of the world, is because there is now the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which are springing up. So for Africa can brand its products that it produces as carbon neutral, because if it's horticulture, it uses it's produced in Kenya, for example, and it is green energy used to produce that, and they're using smart irrigation as well, and you can brand this product as a green product under the global arena. So I think this is extremely important, not just for Africa, but also for multinational firms that want to invest as well. Now, in order for all of this to happen, the Secretary also mentioned the point about enablers. There's certain enablers that are required throughout the continent. On the technology side, there's the need for better data, storage of data, sharing of data. There's need for technology tagging, so you know where the products are coming from and you can track them. There's need for more digital solutions, and that of course requires a lot of energy as well. In addition to that, we have looked in the report, you'll see we've run a technology readiness index of the African continent to see whether these certain countries have the minimum standards for this. And there are quite a number of them, but I'll mention just a few: South Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, and Mauritius, which are even above the global average. So this is very important. And then lastly, technology and financing, using of blockchain, which is very crucial, and the creditworthiness. It's important to be able to attract investment when the investors know that the financing is going to the right place at the right time and it's secure. One of the biggest enablers, the Secretary also alluded to, is the African Continental Free Trade Area. Regional integration is critical. Free movement of goods is critical. Free movement of skills is critical. And this is all important because when private investors come to Africa, they need scale. If they're going to build a car manufacturing plant, they need scale. They need to know that it can be exported throughout Africa without dealing with customs, taxes, VAT. And so the whole objective of that is to get rid of taxes so that they can move freely. Now, when you look at the report about what Africa actually is producing, it may sound a little bit bleak now, but the point is, if you turn to page 90 of the report, what is interesting to see there is that you can actually see the different components African countries do, from processing of raw materials to making components to assembling these components as final products. And you will see from the maps the countries that have those capabilities. So when I go back to the African continent in future, it is clear that Africa as a whole has the potential to get involved in its capturing the technology intensive global supply chains. But it needs to work together in and there's some examples that are already going on today. You may have heard in Ghana has just opened a Nissan factory plant in Ghana, where they're there to produce 50,000 cars. You also know that South Africa produces motor cars. But within these two complex, they're also producing components for assembly of cars. So the components are not all coming from Japan. The components are also coming from African continent, which I think is a very important element. But in order for Africa to benefit from all of this and be able to use regional integration, there is a need for regional industrial development plans. And we're already beginning to see this coming to shape. For example, ECOWAS region have already established a framework policy on developing a value chain for automotive industry. We've also seen in DRC and in Zambia, where they are already having an agreement to establish an economic zone that will deal with the development and production of batteries. So, and this is continuing throughout the continent. We know in Morocco as well that they also are producing, they just signed a new agreement to produce Citroen EV cars. So what we are hoping is that the countries, the continent, but also the external investors and international manufacturers can see the same thing we are seeing, opportunities for them to actually develop and get Africa involved in the global supply chain. Now, you will ask, after all I've said, the question is Africa's supply chain ready? Well, that's a yes and a no as well. It's not a clear cut. But we believe that, as the Secretary General mentioned, the human capital, the youth, is in Africa. The natural resources, the critical minerals necessary to produce batteries and these new generation cars and these new energy sources are in Africa. 46.7% of manganese and 46.5% of cobalt is in Africa. The question we have to ask is, do we want to ship this to another continent and be processed by using fossil fuels, or do we want to keep it on the continent, develop our supply chains, use renewable sources, use the youth we have, and create decent and intellectual jobs for the up-and-coming youth of society that we have today. So, what is important then for Africa is clustering, cluster formation of these new industries throughout the continent, harmonization of regulations, and also product registration, IPs. So the report actually details this out, gives you clear examples. And this is not just a report for African governments, but it is also very much a sales pitch to the multinational community, to the international community, to investors. There are great opportunities for Africa as well. Now, let me end there. But I'd like to say that this is an excellent read, even for you young people on the Saturday night. So I encourage you, once the embargo is over, to have a good read of it, and we look forward to any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Many thanks, Paul, for that presentation, giving us a deep dive into the report. Three key takeaways: class information, report administration, and harmonization of policies, especially with regards to trade. And you have assured us that we will be the right solution to the test. We want to transition into the Q&A session. And the way we shall do this is that you will shoot up your hand, get a mic, introduce yourself, make a question of every point clear and to move, and we shall batch them into three. So we have both pressmen in the room and those plugging in virtually. We shall take care of all sides. So please just bring forward your questions. Before we get into that, as I get ready to see any hands coming up, Secretary General, the question has been asked why this report, global report is in particular, being launched in Nairobi. There you go.
Yes, well, first is because it's an African report, and we thought it should be launched in Africa. Before it has been launched in Geneva, but it's not for the Swiss people, it's for the African countries and the African population. So it was very important to come here and to launch it in the country. Second, because Kenya, as I said before, is this engine of dynamic growth for East Africa. And in some way, it connects the national dynamism with the voice for the integration of the countries. Kenya has been a very important supporter of the African continental free trade area. And the East African community has been really ahead of many of the other integration schemes in terms of trying to take away all the barriers that are obstacles for that integration. So Africa has a Kenya has a very important voice in the African country. But also let me say that Kenya and the voice of the president has been very important at the international level. And we know that we need all of the three. We need good national policies, we need a regional integration, but we need the international community. Because also the conditions at the international level will affect our possibilities at the national and the regional for development. So the voice of the president has been very important in terms of the international financial architecture, of the financing for the transition to renewable energy, and the need of the countries to have the space and the financing to be able to do what we need to do for really the sustainable development goals and the ambition to assure prosperity to be real. And I think that the three elements have this realm in Kenya today. So that's why we chose first Africa, but also Nairobi.
Thank you so much for that context setting why we are having this report being launched in Nairobi. I can see 3 hands. Let me start with the gentleman at the back there. Please introduce yourself and which institution you want with and shoot your question. And then shall come here.
Thank you.
Could you please on the mic? Mic to is the question being asked here?
My name is Vincent from the East Africa. I have a couple of questions, one for Ms. Grynspan and the other for Mr. Akiwumi. So to Ms. Grynspan, is there evidence that the need to diversify supply of these critical resources, like the minerals needed for drinking technology, will especially benefit Africa? Because what we've seen, for instance, the European Union, in their diversification plan, they are intending to recycle more and to expand domestic extraction, and that definitely is going to impact African production. So what evidence is there that the diversification is going to help Africa, or what can we do to ensure that it helps? Then to Mr. Akiwumi, sorry. I wanted to know if this potential for Africa to capture technology-intensive supply chain, global supply chain, is going to help all of Africa, because from what we know, not every country in Africa is mineral rich. For instance, here in Kenya, the primary sector has been on a decline. So is every country going to benefit, because it's different everywhere? Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. We have a hand on this side. Do we have the microphone here, please?
Thank you. My name is Faisal Ahmed from CCTV. My question is to maybe for is it, why is it that African countries are disadvantaged when it comes to borrowing and paying back of facilities to companies? And maybe by how much has this affected growth, the disproportionate financing?
Goes on here. Let's take one last question. Also, please take it.
Yeah, my name is Rebecca for German Radio. I have two questions. One of your points is that Africa should concentrate. One of your points is that Africa should concentrate more on sustainable energy, like solar power. In Kenya, we had actually producers of solar panels, but right now, everything is being imported from China because of we cannot compete with the production costs. And this means actually qualified Kenyans are losing their jobs. What could be done, in your opinion, to make Kenya and other African countries to be on the same production level and not to depend on imports? And the last question is, how much of the global investment in renewable energies comes to Africa?
Thank you. I'd like us to take those questions first, then we shall have for another batch of questions. The first ones go to the Secretary General. Is there evidence that diversification of supply chains will benefit Africa? And also, why is Africa disadvantaged when it comes to tapping into the global markets from a debt perspective? Those are questions from Vincent and Faisal.
Hello. So thank you all of them. Excellent questions, let me say. The first question from Vincent. It is in the world, we have seen a movement for more protectionism and more fragmentation in the global trade. So it is true what you say, that we see in the US and we see in Europe a lot of policies going into strengthening their market and their internal production and competitiveness. That is true. And it's something that has to be, for us, even a stronger reason for our integration at the regional level and for our ambition in terms of our going forward in a more dramatic way. Yeah. And I don't think that Europe will be able to compete with Africa in terms of critical minerals. That is quite clear. You know, as Paul was saying, and as my numbers show, you know, Africa is home to 48% of the world's reserves of cobalt and manganese, 80% of the world's reserves of phosphate rock, that is also important for fertilizers and also important for batteries, and 92% of the world's reserves of platinum group metals. Yes? So in that sense, the endowment of the African continent vis-a-vis other continents cannot be put on question. So the question is if we will be able to add value in the supply chain, if we will be able to go up in the ladder, in the tiers that I referred to before. And that depends on us. You know, it's true that there are other parts of the world that are trying to strengthen their own policies, their own production, their own competitive advantage with respect to the rest. If we do nothing, yes, we will lag behind. But if we are able to have the ambition to leapfrog in development and to understand that precisely that endowment can give us the possibility for the intermediate goods and the high tech goods that we are talking about, that I think that is a huge opportunity for Africa right now. Because the world will move in that direction. The raw materials will be needed. So if we learn from the past, where we didn't do that, yes, when we continued just as Paul was saying, yes, to just sell our raw materials with no value added, with not put in negotiations with respect to our endowment. So you may be right, you know, the opportunity won't be there. But what we are saying is that the diversification of sources, that the renewable energy transition, and that the demographic of Africa and its endowment are, you know, good basis for this to happen. It's not a dream in a sense that is not achievable. It is very achievable if the right policies, the continental integration is there for this to happen. And let me say, maybe Vincent here, and I'm sorry to maybe to expand a little bit, is that I come also from a developing country, from a small country. And we were able to diversify our economy against the odds. Yes? It was because we had a long-term view. Many times we forget that the long term and the short term start at the same time. There is no possibility of really a different long term if we don't plan from today. Yes? And the long term is not only as a succession of short terms that are not, you know, that are not driven by a vision. And so here I really think, having been in development for so long, that the reasons that we put into reform for Africa to be able to do this now are very real, very concrete, very detailed in some parts of the report, and very doable. So we really think that this is the moment, yes, in which Africa can make it happen. With respect to the very important question of citizens, and it's a very good question. We have to admit that the international financial system is asymmetric, and that if we don't change certain rules, the system only reproduces the asymmetries. And part of the boards of the UN and UNCTAD, and the UN Secretary General, and the President of Kenya in this respect, yes, President Ruto, has been to change the rules that reproduce the asymmetries. So the perception of risk of the international investors with respect to our countries is distorted by perception, not necessarily by the basics of economics. And let me be sincere saying that the rating agencies don't help. They really hurt us because their perception of risk reproduce that perception and not necessarily the reality of the economics. And we have shown this in many ways. We have shown the same basic indicators in the economy with respect to growth, with respect to fiscal deficit or external deficit, etc., in two countries, one in the developed world and one in the developing world, and the developed world will be able to finance that with much lower rates than the country in the developing world. And so what we have been advocating is for the reform of the international financial system, not to weaken it, but to strengthen it, to be able not to reproduce the asymmetries that the global financial system already embeds already. And as I said, it doesn't make any sense that the developing countries, Africa in this case, is paying 8 times the rates that the European countries are paying for the same debt. So, in a way, you ask yourself, can I really do what I have to do, pay 8 times more for the resources and the financial resources that we need? And that's why we have been advocating for the 3 words that are better liquidity, better instruments for investment, and also better system, institutional system for debt restructuring for the developing countries. And the report from the Secretary General, the policy brief is there to be consulted. It's an important one. And the report I referred to with respect to debt is very graphic. It's very easy to read because it almost doesn't have any words. But we show how this is played in terms of the development of the countries and what is the burden that really happens. One indicator that we use in the debt report is that right now, 3.3 billion people in the planet live in countries that are paying more to service the debt than what they are investing in education or health. So if we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, you tell me how we are going to achieve the goals if we cannot spend in education and health, that are basic needs of the people, in a proper manner because of the effect of the debt servicing. With respect, and this has to do with the sustainable energy question. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. And the issue of solar panels and the competition on the solar panels. And it's true that China has become the main producer of solar panels. But what we saw in the time of COVID and with the trade disruptions, and when China had to close down, because of COVID for so long, is that relying 80% of the solar panels trade on one supplier is a problem. And precisely the renewable energy value chain was so disrupted that many of the projects have to halt. They were ready to initiate in a moment where energy prices were going up, and they were not able to do it because trade was disrupted in the supply chain. So diversification of the production of solar panels are happening now. It is true that to be able to be competitive, as Paul said, we need to do more to be competitive. But the opportunity for the production of solar panels is really there. Yes, and I think that we need more private sector development for it, and capacity building for the jobs that solar panels can provide, renewable energy can provide. And part of it is the modeling of the finance, that Paul was talking about. So I don't know, Paul, if you want to expand on this. But there was another question there, that how much of the investment in renewables are coming to Africa. And if I don't mistake, and James, you are here with us, in our global investment report that we launched just 1 month ago, I think that is 2%, if my memory is not mistaken. 2%, only 2% of the investment in renewable are coming to Africa. So that's precisely what we are saying. Yes, here is the opportunity, but the investment that has to come to this country is not coming. And so we have to, to call on the international community on the asymmetries that I referred to before, but also the continental integration and the national policies have to play an important role for this to be overcome.
Thank you very much. Vincent, your question on the global supply chain, capturing it with all of Africa will benefit or some will benefit. Well, the short answer is that they will all benefit in different ways. Some countries have the natural resources, the critical minerals, but they don't have the energy to transform that in the first place, or they don't have the knowledge to transform that, or the skills. So they have to go to a neighboring country, which will probably have the most of the skills to transform that. And then, of course, then it's adding the second layer, which is making of components, and they will have other countries who are capable of making certain components. And thirdly is the assembly of the final component. So it's you may want to think about it like the Airbus model in Europe. European countries, not one country makes Airbus, but they all make certain different components with their strength and their comparative advantages and skill sets they have. And that is something that can also happen on the continent. And as I mentioned, if you look at that, this quick diagram on the page I mentioned here in 91, you will see the transformation, the capabilities and skills of countries, of African countries in tier 1 processing to tier 2, which is making components to tier 3, the other way around, tier 3 to tier 2, making components to tier 1 assembly. And you see across, and you can play around with it and even draw a map for yourself of how the supply chains could be. So the benefit of this and regional integration therefore is extremely good for Africans. The goods can move freely across borders, no tariffs and no customs. And that will enable it. And then you have the scale of the continent as well for sale as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Esther, for the responses. Let's take the next batch of 3. We have a hand up here, then here, and then we'll go to the bottom. Oh, so you can start since you're just introduce yourself. One question only, please.
Hi, my name is Hafsa Hassan from the university student, and I would like to ask on the context of how trade policies can be designed to promote sustainable economic growth in Africa while still ensuring fair and equitable distribution of benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's get the mic next here.
Gracias, Secretary General. Thank you, Mr. King. My name is Rebeca. I work for Space International News Agency. You've mentioned that national policies are important, and I was wondering if you could expand on what specific policies could Kenya's government and every African government just start developing right now. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a hand at the back there.
Good morning, my name is Victoria Munga from Voice of America. In regards to, you mentioned Africa is paying 8 times more to the loans compared to the other continents, and you mentioned that perception is one of the reasons as to why. But did you look into what is creating that perception? What is the role of Africa in regards to making the lenders look, or rather create that perception? Look at how much of default African continents have had in terms of the monies or the funds that are borrowed. In a nutshell, I'm just asking, what is the role of Africa in regards to that perception that is being created out there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's take one question here and respond.
Hi, maybe it's just to add on what she said. My name is Victor Kiprop.
I read about the conversation about rating agencies and the perception and the cost of borrowing and the need to reform the financial system there. I would just want to know what your thoughts about the calls we've been seeing around for a continental-based ratings agency that would be able to, quote unquote, rate the continent correctly. What are your thoughts? Thank you.
Thank you. One last one here.
Good morning. I'm Alda Margaret Kimani. I'm an investment banker. And this topic is very close to my heart because I think I've heard you talk about I believe, in my personal opinion, I just recently came from Ghana and I've visited Ethiopia. I do a lot of research. It's part of my job as an investment banker. And my question would be, I think I've not had, probably, next door we are doing something on traceability. Traceability, yeah? I think you understand the lingo there. I'm finding that now that I'm based in Kenya, a lot of our goods cannot travel alone. Yes, there's a factor of the finance, the complications of the bureaucracy, and of course every country has their own policy even around finance. But you can see, even within Africa, we have these man-made, can I call them man-made barriers that we've created for I don't know can I politely say that it's colonization. And she said, I think you also said it right, perception, right? And even from an investment banking now, you can say that the ratings, there's more underlying issues behind the rating, in line with what you've asked, Kipro. So my question would be, I'll take a different angle, because I'm proudly Kenyan and we are championing this, the Africa we want, we are the ones to shape the Africa we want. And yes, I feel both of you that, I'm also an economist, I feel both of you when you say that the time is now, but I feel like we are not moving at the right space. And as a proud African or proud Kenyans, I feel like if we can innovate around the problems we ourselves see in the community. So I was looking to see if you could talk a little bit about innovation. Innovation around even manufacturing, coming up with solutions. As I pass the mic, you know that, I say this, you know that a lot of the problems you see in terms of goods and services becoming very expensive and all the ratings that we're talking about, it's obviously because we are not making enough, we're not producing enough ourselves. And manufacturing, the capital intensity of the cost of manufacturing, you find that, for example, we have a lot of raw materials, right? But we are shipping them because we don't have the equipment. So I want to hear more about innovation around the solutions we have, the challenges.
Thank you so much for your question. So we have 4 questions here, and I would like you for them right to the SG for very brief responses. We shall be going virtual next, so I've got a couple of questions from the virtual audience. I'll be taking them next.
The first question was from Hassan, and about trade policy and what are the right trade policies for equitable distribution. And let me say this, maybe as a first. Trade is not a national strategy. It is part of a national strategy. Because we have to understand that trade is the result of what we produce. So if we only focus on the trade part of it, we will forget about the productive policy strategies that need to be developed for a wide-based economy. And probably here lies one of the weaknesses many times when we talk about trade, that we talk about trade in isolation of what should be a national strategy for the result of trade to be inclusive and really progressive in terms of the country. So this is the first important point that I think that we have to understand. And that's why, for example, here in Kenya, we are working, Paul and his group, we are working in the productive capacity index to understand what are the gaps that needs to be flows, and this goes also to which national policies we are looking at. We are looking at the productive capacity index on how to close the gaps in productivity, in skills, in digitalization, in backward linkages in the country, to be able to take advantage of the trade, the global trade, and insert ourselves in the global economy in a better way. Because we are doing this not to develop with our backs to the international economy. What we want is to have a better standing in the international economy. And I think that that is precisely the nucleus of our message. Yes, we can do this together. And so integrating Africa allows us for the trade to be better, for the barriers that you were talking about, for the convergence, the harmonization on rules and regulations and non-tariff barriers, not only tariff barriers, but the non-tariff barriers that are even in many cases more important than the tariff barriers themselves. So we need a more integrated approach to trade for it to be equitable and really be able to deliver the results that we want. Now, there is part of it that has to do with the international community. What are the rules of the game? And if the rules of the game are okay for us, yes, in terms of being able to reap the benefits of the international economy. But that is, I will leave that part for another occasion. With respect to what Victoria said, I think that is an important point. Let me say, I come from a continent that defaulted in the 80s. Yes? I was in the government when we renegotiated our debt. If you look back, there were many factors for that, why that happened. Yes? There were internal factors, but there were a lot of external factors. Like we are seeing today in a certain way. Yes? There was a strengthening of the dollar, there was a change in the interest rates policy in the US. There was the energy crisis, at the end of the 70s. And there was a turn in the terms of trade. And obviously, national policies and what we did was important, but also we couldn't cope alone with all what was happening at the global level. And I think that now it's not the same as the 80s, but some of the reasons are the same, in the sense that after COVID, yes, and because of climate change hitting even stronger our countries, and because of the war in Ukraine, that was something that we didn't expect to happen, and then food prices and energy prices rose so steep in the world markets, we didn't have the capacity to cope with these global issues that were not of our doing. It's true that we can have better policies, we can have more transparency, that we can really strengthen our policy framework. And that's why I always say national policies are not relevant. If you don't do what you have to do, you cannot really take the benefits or change the perception. Yes? But let me give you the example of Ghana. Yeah? Ghana was perceived as a secure country for investment. It really received a lot of loans from the private sector. But in front of the global crisis and the cascading crisis, they couldn't cope. So in a way, what we try to make also the international community to understand is that there is a shared responsibility here. Yeah. That COVID is not our fault, that climate change is not our fault, and that the war in Ukraine is not our fault, and that then we need better instruments of liquidity of in debt and investment to be able to change the perception too. Let me give you an example. There are certain countries, big countries in the emerging markets, that have swap arrangements with the US Treasury. No, that changed the perception of risk. Yes, they are less risky because of that fact than other countries that are in the same situation. If we would have a more universal swap regime that will also change that perception for our countries, that will help a lot. So a less fragmented system and more universal system that will give some guarantees when global shocks hit, we will be able also to be better equipped to change the perception of investors and rating agencies. And that goes to crypto. Question in terms of if they read the continent correctly. No, I don't think so. But also because they are in New York. Yes. They're not here. They don't know you. That's the truth. Probably many other organizations in the UN can read the African countries and the developing countries much better than the group that is in New York looking at the continent from a desk. Yes, with numbers or also their perception of reality. They need to be more embedded in the realities of these countries, but they are very centralized organizations. And so I don't think that they know these countries very well. So, a spreadsheet will really determine their perception of risk. And they are very influential in the private sector, yes, and the private sector perception of the country. And that is why that when you have, and many times when I go to countries, the private sector is much more optimistic than the projections at the international level. Because when you know the reality by heart, yes, you are able to differentiate many factors. When you are away and you are distant, it's more difficult to do that, to be more relevant. So,
perhaps I'll just add to two things that Secretary General has mentioned. First of all, with regard to rating, you may not be aware that the African Union and the Economic Commission for Africa do produce a ratings report as well. But as the Secretary General says, they're not the ones in control of the system, but they do provide it. So you can freely go and Google it and look yourself and see how the African Union and the Economic Commission for Africa rate Africa as a whole. The second thing is that as the Secretary General mentioned, in order to produce goods and services, in order to achieve structural transformation, you have to have the productive capacities for the country. As you mentioned, that you have to have the right institutions, you have the natural capital, you need the right human capital, you need ICT, you need energy, you need the private sector, without a doubt, infrastructure and agriculture. And this, what we have worked with the Kenyan government to Vision 2030 is to look at how we can use the index to benchmark it, and we've discovered where the gaps and limitations are, and where the challenges are, and where the opportunities are. And it's very clear that if one wants to, and Africa wants to, get involved in capturing technology-intensive global supply chains, the policies have to change as well. And you mentioned that policies are extremely important. With regard to policies, educational policies, you must have, if you're going to go into that industry, you must have produced enough engineers, you must produce enough ICT people. You have to have mechanical engineers if you're producing components or manufacturing plants. There has to be a concerted strategic effort to do this, not left to chance and hope that you have people around. So many countries we visit throughout the world, we see that there are clear linkages between economic development plans of the country and the educational system, that they're producing the people they need for and for the sectors. And not just simply everybody going to university and lots of PhDs, but not supporting the sector. And this goes also to the technical level as well. You know, you need electricians, you need plumbers, you know, you need engineers, you need road constructors, you know, you need these type of people. So you have to make a concerted effort to link these things to the economy. So I just want to mention that. And on innovation side in Kenya, there's a lot of innovation going on. There's a lot of startups who are innovative in many ways in the agriculture sector. Now, when we talk about the youth in the agriculture sector, the youth don't want to go with a djembe and dig a hole. They're using ICT to help provide the farmers with the latest weather reports, with extension services. If your crops are not doing well, you take a picture and send it to them, they'll tell you what you need to do with it. The storage of your products, with also distribution, because the sale of your products. There's a lot happening, but it needs scaling up, as I said to Jerry mentioned. To scale up, you need investment. And that's the critical thing.
Thank you so much for that. Our time is fast spent, so we'll take two questions from them. Actually, consolidate them into one because they're the same question. SG, just a minute. There's a question being asked around the status update regarding the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and this is a question from Jamie of Associated Press and Gabrielle from Reuters News Agency. What's your quick with the Black Sea Grain Initiative? Exactly what efforts are underway to revive the game?
Yes, well, as the Secretary General of the United Nations have said, we continue to make all efforts to bring the exports of grain and fertilizers from Ukraine and the Russian Federation to global markets, because that is the only way and the fastest way in which we can stabilize the market and stabilize the prices. And we are in contact with all partners, with Ukraine, with Turkey, with the Russian Federation, in trying to make this happen. This is not an easy task. We were able to strike a deal and two agreements that were signed in July 2022. For 1 year, we were able to maintain the two agreements running for the exports of grain and fertilizers from both countries, but in the midst of a war. And so it's not easy, it's difficult. And obviously, the bombardment of or shelling of the infrastructure of grain infrastructure is not helping the markets. And the ones that are suffering the most from this situation, obviously, is the most vulnerable, because food prices are a very important component of income expenditure, precisely, of the vulnerable households. And so when food prices go up, many of our countries are hit twice. One, because of the price increase, but second, because of the devaluation or the strengthening of the dollar that is happening in the markets. In many of the countries, devaluation accounts for half of the domestic price increases. Yeah? So, the main point to respond to the question is we need to continue to do. We won't spare any effort in trying to get to world markets the food and fertilizers from both countries. But efforts have to continue. We are not there yet. I suppose there is also one question that is related to this, if you allow me, that is WFP. Yes, because 75% of the purchases of the World Food Program to serve the people people that is already in hunger and salmon famine. It was purchased last year from the Black Sea Grain Initiative from Ukraine. And so that is also a concern, yes, in terms of the World Food Program to be able to continue to deliver humanitarian aid to the countries that are, and to the populations that are in need.
Many thanks to the Secretary General of the United Nations, of UNCTAD I should say, and let's appreciate them for their insights and this morning, as well as yeah, it sounds like it's back on. Thank you. I'd like to appreciate everyone who has been part of this engagement. I understand there are a number of side interviews lined up after this, and therefore we need to create ample time for that. Thank you so much for your questions, both virtually and those in the room. We truly appreciate your participation. Let's now digest the report and continue to interact on the subject of Africa trade, as well as matters around fiscal and debt. Thank you so much. I'll be your host, Julians and Amboko. I work with the nation. Appreciate it.
I'm not sure.